Thank you so much, Keith and Gavin. I think we have so much to talk about after that. There's really a lot of food for thought, and not just in terms of technology. I think in our education cultures in general here, I think we've got a lot of food for thought to discuss. And to do that, I'd like to involve and invite two of our panellists to stage. So I'm delighted that we have Myrna Laffin with us as a panellist. She's Managing Director of RTE's Digital Division. She leads a very dynamic, a very innovative and a very young team in that section of RTE, which is broadcasting over a range of platforms, devices and different markets. And they've brought a whole range of new products online, which is RTE.ie, RTE News Now, GAA Go, which brought what the GAA do and RTE together so that all of our diaspora abroad could watch the hurling and the football finals. And I think, all of those digital innovation, while it might not be directly linked to our education system, it's actually bringing that digital literacy of the society in general upwards. So I'm delighted that Myrna is joining us today. And also we have Kieran Cannon, who you've met to launch the Digital Festival this year. As you know, he's one of the founders of the Excited movement and also one of the drivers of Mathletes. So we're going to have a discussion now about what Keith and Gavin have told us about the do's and don'ts. And before I sit down, I'm going to hijack the first one with the question, if that's okay, because I have my own interest in education. I'd also want to open it to the floor. We're going to have two roving mics, so if there's anything that you would like to ask any of our panellists, please feel free to put up a hand and I'll try and grab you. We've got two people roving around to the mic. So my first question, because you told us the last thing you said, don't forget to look out. And you've mentioned Denmark, you've mentioned Finland, you've mentioned Singapore, you've mentioned Japan. I'm going to Japan next month for a research trip because I feel that the collaboration of teachers is incredibly important, and lesson study is something that I think is really powerful and something that actually teachers can really build on with each other in a way that they're supported in taking risks. But our problem is teachers are only recognised for the time that they spend in front of students. And so that's maybe one thing to talk about. Where can we build in professional development and how do we get there? So we've got Kieran, who's policymaker, Myrna, who's got the biggest audience of any of us that we know about. Is there something we could do to perhaps build on that culture of professional development that doesn't yet exist in Ireland? There's no incentives, there's no acknowledgement of secondary school teachers having professional development. So could I throw that out to you, having international experience?
Well, I think one of the things to think about is really redefining what we mean by professional development and thinking about, how does that happen? Is it just at conferences like this? Is it just after school? Is it just having time off? Is there a way to create communities of practice? And so one of the things we see a huge increase in the United States, and I suspect in other places, is using new platforms that connect and create communities for teachers or leaders and allows you in your fuzzy slippers at night at 10 o'clock when you want to pose a question to get the answer. Or if you are an early riser and you get up at 4 in the morning and you're working on that lesson, you can post to that. And so that's one of the things that we see is communities of practice and rethinking a broader definition of professional development.
Yeah, I'd agree absolutely with that, and I think I'm speaking to the wrong audience in a sense because Twitter, I think, is well developed amongst you, but actually using the social media in a range of different ways. For me, I work independently, so my professional development is almost totally Twitter related.
You always have your fuzzy slippers.
And I always have my fuzzy slippers on at home as I do this, I promise you. But I think developing that well, understanding some of the ways in which to do that well, who to follow, sharing who to follow, sharing where things are being developed. Also, I'm sure it's happening with Excited, but actually making so that the sharing part is by the people who are using Twitter generally, but Excited can be driving some of these things. That's part of the way to do it. And I think that redefinition and actually taking control of how professional development happens is a critical message.
Well, we're discussing there the social networks, and Myrna, that's probably something that you've seen an enormous change in, I mean, what we know RTE as is our traditional television broadcaster, but now there are so many other ways of engaging in those different types of media. So is there a way, do you think, that we could begin incorporating that into educating our young people as well?
Yeah, I think that, you know, traditionally you're right, and we were very much one to many, and it was one way. And, you know, even listening to, you know, some of what you were speaking about earlier with regard to listen, I think, you know, our public service mandate is to meet the needs of our audience, and they are changing, those needs are changing. And I think that, you know, where we very much started as a broadcaster, I think part of our growing role is to actually reflect and to provide a platform for the voices of others. And it's still in its infancy, and, you know, we are certainly trying to do that. But with the likes of social media, with, if you like, more participative media, and the likes of, for example, IPTV, etc., there are opportunities, I think, to actually provide a platform for even more. And that's really important. You know, you talk about the ability to filter and to, you know, decide what's real and what's valid, etc. I mean, anybody can put a video up on YouTube, for example, and present themselves as anything. But there has to be, I think our role is to provide a way to curate and validate what's out there. I mean, I would love to see us being able to put, you know, to really facilitate teachers and to facilitate teaching and learning in a much more innovative way than perhaps we've done through broadcast in the past, and in a way that would help, you know, to help some of the new thinking out there, and the new ways of learning, and the new role that teachers have in helping learning as opposed to telling or teaching students. So that, I think, you know, is an evolving role for us, because again, we're not there. You talk about listening, and you talk about being sort of, you know, people-centric, not tech-centric. But actually, that's what we need to do. So I think we have to have our ears open and our eyes open in a different way. And it's not us necessarily just, you know, us telling, but it's us facilitating. And things are changing all the time, and that's really, really exciting. And I don't believe it's necessarily up to us to necessarily be disruptive, but we have to be open to that disruption and new trends, and help them, and help get them to the right audience. So that's my very long-winded way of saying I would love to be able to help. And I think that that's our role, and that's our obligation.
And it's probably part of preparing students in that synthesis, is what you said, Gavin, you know, those higher orders of learning and Bloom's taxonomy, not just to be able to take it and read it from the internet or read it from Twitter, but actually maybe to look at the different platforms that are out there with RTE or whoever else it might be, and actually go, okay, well, I'm taking from all these different sources, how can I evaluate this and how can I synthesize that? And that's incorporating then the higher order learning. I'll throw it out to the audience if somebody has a question for our panelists, and if not right now, Kieran, I'm going to take a bugbear with one thing you said in your introduction, which is, and I like the fact that you said, I think we should go with our gut on this and drive it forward, and there absolutely is need for that, because you don't want to get stayed and have a report gathering dust somewhere. But at the same time, you said, we don't have to rely on research to prove it. And I just went, oh, because there's so many people out there who think, I have a great idea and this is going to work. And then something happens and there's loads of a drive and then it fizzles out. But I don't actually think that that's what you mean, because you are bringing students into this an awful lot with that as well. You're expanding on that voice that's driving this movement.
Yes, I mean, you know, I think there's a happy medium to be struck between carrying out some very in-depth and high-quality research into potential new learning opportunities. But I also think there's a time when you, to a certain extent, ride the crest of a wave. If you're getting exceptionally positive feedback from teachers, and in particular from young people, about their experience of using a new learning tool, I think at times you've got to kind of move with that, work with them, perhaps in encouraging other teachers, students to get on board and see where it takes you. I think we're a little bit obsessed, not alone in this country, but in a lot of countries, on when a new idea emanates from wherever it emanates from, and it seems to be working in one particular setting, we say, well, stop there, let's not move it any further until we test this against international standards, or we do some sort of a long-term research project on it. I'm a bit fearful that that can be a blocking force for change. And you know, we carried out some excellent research last year on an initiative from Canada from a teacher called John Mighton on Jump Math. And it's funny, a lot of the research that was carried out into that particular program led us down the path of Mathletes, actually allowed us to work with Sean O'Sullivan and indeed with others, with their teacher education centres and with the PDST in getting Mathletes underway, and allowed us to draw particular conclusions about what might work in an Irish school setting using the Khan Academy. So there's a balance to be struck, I agree completely, but I do think we tend to retreat to the safety of let's research it first every time before we move forward, that small step to innovation. You know,
But I think we, you know, and I'm not in education, but I think
Neither
we
am I.
can learn a lot from, you know, new ways of doing things and a more iterative approach to what happens. And that's not to say that puts the tried and tested,
Exactly.
you know, denies it or puts it away in a different box. But, you know, I know that certainly in my business we learn so much from young people, and we learn, you know, what they're interested in, how they do it and how they think. And it is different. That doesn't make it wrong. But I think that, you know, there's a way for us to try things out. And you know what? If it doesn't work, you move on.
Yeah.
I
mean,
But there are other imperatives, I think, sorry, diving in,
Oh, yeah.
but so one of the things that really gets me is we sit comfortably talking about these things. The reason why what you're doing is so important, and the reason why we should feel the imperative for innovation, is I look at the figures for unemployment amongst the 15 to 24-year-olds. If you look around the world, America sits quite nicely with it's between 15 and 20%. That's still too high. The UK is sort of 25%. Ireland is about 30%. Spain is about 50%. If you look at those figures, those are serious figures. Now, I know that education isn't all about not all about getting a job, but the bit that we're involved with here, I think, is about creating new jobs. And there's an imperative there driven by the proportions that we're talking about. And those proportions are not something that we can sit by and watch and then think, oh, is that all right? Will we do that? So my message on that is, I love the Department of Education in the United States last week, or a couple of weeks ago, brought out an EdTech Developers Guide. And early in that EdTech Developers Guide, it says, innovate, don't digitize. So I think that's a great message. What we need to be doing is putting innovation into education through what's coming out of that EdTech world, EdTech development world, working with that, because really the kind of nuanced message I wanted to give about innovation was where our education isn't working, we should innovate as hard as we can. Where it is going beautifully along, then we can rest a little back.
But you talked earlier about you know, students thinking differently and being able to, you know, search and really be able to filter information. I mean, they need to learn how to think differently. You know, one of the things that is helping our country recover from the economic disaster that we've had is almost like a new wave of entrepreneurship, and that is, you know, that is people thinking differently and being perhaps more adventurous and being braver and believing in their own ideas. And it's really important, I think, that students, you know, are helped with some of those tools and are helped with the confidence to believe in their own ideas.
Can I follow up on that point? Because I think it was Keith that you said it was really important that we prepare our students for university as well as for working life.
And for living.
And for living, exactly. And maybe sometimes we don't do a great job of that either. But if we have other countries like Denmark where they can use the internet and things like that, if we should be developing them as innovators and entrepreneurs, as Myrna said, this might be a contentious issue today because we've just announced that our way of assessing our students really isn't going to change. But if we're bringing in all of this innovation into how they're learning, should we be following that up at the other end of how we're assessing them actually throughout that learning?
Correct.
And assessing at the very end as well? Because what I hear a lot, because I'm now working in a university, is a lot of professors say they do not come into us being able to evaluate what they know or to synthesize information in the way that we give it to them.
Well, in the United States, I would say that the assessment tail has wagged the learning dog. And assessment is very important, but we ought to define assessment is a piece of learning. It isn't the end. What we want to, and I think too often we've had and we're in a major fight now as all 50 of our states are deciding whether they want to have common standards and common assessments or go at their own. And so it's a very contentious issue. But I guess, and maybe this is riffing off of kind of what you were talking about, continuous improvement. I mean, I think if you're looking for the answer and it's going to be presented in a research journal, it's probably going to be in the technology area about something that's been around so long that it's probably no longer relevant. But I think if we look at places that are really innovative, like Silicon Valley or your entrepreneurial aspects of Ireland, I think it's when you're continuously learning. And so the mistake we make sometimes at conferences like this is we come here, we hear a presentation, and it's like the bright, shiny object that we envisioned has come down and landed on. And in fact, if you're really in charge of a new and innovative effort, probably what you originally envisioned isn't what happened, but you iterated it. You learned from it, and you got better. And so one of the things that Gavin and I have been trying to do in the United States is talk about failure. And it's not because we want to highlight failure.
We did talk about failure. We didn't fail to talk about it.
Well, that's right. But I don't think it's because we want to celebrate the failure. What we want to celebrate is what we learned from things that didn't come out the way that we thought they would. And that's really a dangerous thing in education because there are policymakers who say, well, you said you were going to do A and it's B. So,
So failure bad.
Right.
Yes.
But this is where technology comes in, and we're going to have some of our students talk later about Coder Dojo and programming, things like that, because when you're programming, you fail all of the time. You have to debug, you have to go back, oh my God, I forgot a full stop, and you learn from your failure, and I think that is so important.
Doing real things, and that's one of the great, I used to talk about the flight simulator way of failing. If you run a flight simulation, you know when you failed, you crash. And what does it make you want to do? It wants to make you to get up and try again and do it better. But the assessment is immediate. The assessment is positive because it makes you want to do it again. And I think too much of the assessment that we do in schools is something quite different.
autopsies.
Autopsies, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why
Black box recorders.
that's why I think students are so attracted to Khan Academy, and because
Yeah.
you fail right there and then, and you find out how to succeed right there and then,
Yeah.
seconds later, and you're teaching yourself. You're learning what concepts you're not familiar with. If you're approaching a particular mathematical challenge, you know within a couple of hours where your weaknesses are, and the resources are there for you to correct them immediately, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why we've gone from 0 to 13,000 students in 17 months, because for them it's a completely new learning experience.
And it's immediate feedback.
It is
as I
immediate
said,
feedback, and the resources, having got the feedback, to go back and learn where I went wrong. You know?
I think that's something that's bringing in Carol Dweck and growth mindsets where students really learn. It's okay if I'm not getting an A+ at this the first time. I will make an effort and I'll try and get better at it. And that's where technology can actually really bring our teaching
That
and learning
immediate
forward.
feedback, I think that so much is focused on the high stakes formative assessments when in every other industry sector, what's really empowered consumers is having real data constantly so that they can make better decisions. And that's the same in the gaming world too. Everybody starts at level 1, but as soon as you get level 1, it takes you to level 2. It doesn't take you back to 1. Then it takes you on to, and it keeps hammering you on what you don't know.
No.
What honestly, that's actually what a high-performing learning environment is.
That's a really nice analogy. Now, I'm conscious that we have a lot of revolutionaries already in the audience, and Keith and Gavin gave us a lot of do's and don'ts. One thing that I thought would be of interest were the don'ts of funding and things like that. So is there anything that anybody would like to ask before I
disagree
hijack all
with.
of the questions? Or disagree with you? We've got a gentleman in the corner, if we can get a microphone, please.
Hello, Paddy Flood, and I'm working with the Junior Cycle for Teachers with the department. I suppose I'll preface my remarks by saying I think that even not specifically about today, but there's significant shifts in the way we're looking at assessment and learning, and that's agreed by all in terms of what's been announced. One of the things we have been doing over the past year, because Myrna definitely practices what she preaches, in that we've been working with RTE using the Doc on One and how that can be made accessible to teachers of English. And as teachers for a long time, I suppose, we certainly have had a very big focus on the curated text, as in the textbook that has come from certain publishers, etc. And I think that it's a cautionary, not explosive step is to move towards the curated digital text, but it's such a big minefield. And I'm interested from the international speakers in particular, have you come across examples or have you advice in terms of the whole notion of having, I suppose, more refined curation of text so that they can be consumed by students in school on a daily basis?
Okay, so it's to not be so dependent on the textbook as the curriculum resource, I suppose. Is that?
Yes, and the
Yeah.
potential of all those wonderful digital pieces that are out there and in the archives and newly created and being created. But it just, I suppose, very often for schools, it's such a, it's literally the universe out there, and how do we start, how do we choose, where do we go? And I think
Okay.
better curation would encourage schools
Okay.
to move towards that.
So I suppose it's almost, how do you have an accessibility route to all of these other wonderful resources that are there? Because it's very difficult for a teacher to move entirely. Well, this is what I've depended on. I know what it is. I don't have to take a risk in doing it. How can I actually be encouraged to access all of these other things in the archive and everything else like that?
I mean, I would say that there is a general movement which has, or what I'm seeing is a general movement towards the a wider view of what constitutes a text worth reading. And that, of course, is linked to the development of skills of understanding and critical reading, rather than simply accepting something as being the text. It's interesting. I'm hearing stuff from Finland at the moment, which is Finland moving towards the adoption of a wider range of text, the use of e-readers in a different kind of way to enable that. And Finland's one of these countries which actually all the other Nordic countries look at closely because it has been so successful in its education system. But I think that is part of releasing the rather narrow view on this is the text to read. Because actually, when you look at the wider group of texts and you develop that critical thinking about what texts are, so I think one of the things we all have to learn is what we read might not be true. And so often isn't. And it's kind of ridiculous that we take children through a believe everything you read phase. And actually, weren't a lot of the fairy tales that are told kind of written as cautionary tales and be careful and all the rest of it? So they're kind of on the borders of taking a different view.
Yeah.
Of the way we
I
do.
think that question could also have something to deal with what Keith was talking about, which was leading from the middle, because I think in Ireland and in many other countries we have a huge tradition of the curriculum is coming down and I will take whatever I need to do that well. But actually we can be empowered a little bit from the bottom up and saying, I'm going to take what the curriculum says from my perspective, and perhaps that leads in with the
Yeah, and I think
leading
it's
from
what
the
do we
middle.
mean by digital curriculum, and a lot of people, it could mean just, digitizing existing curriculum, and that may not be. But I think when you're talking to things like, open education resources, and Khan Academy is a great example of that, where, a variety of people are creating it and providing it for free. And I think what we're seeing a big movement 86% of our district technology leaders in the United States predict that in the next 3 years, over half of their money they spend on curriculum will be spent on digital as opposed to traditional textbooks. So there's a big movement there. That's a big reshifting of monies that you already have. And we see many of the technology initiatives in the United States happening because they're not spending it on traditional textbooks. And there are some school districts that have gone fully, they don't buy any textbooks. They've gone and they create their own with their teachers. That's really hard, but like Vail, Arizona does that. There are other
That's
examples.
happening here in Ireland as well. I mean, there's a school in Lara Daba, a teacher, and she'll be with us tomorrow, telling us how she and her students are collaborating to create their own text, their own digital text. And it's a resource that's being added, and it evolves over time. And they were very fortunate. It's a new school, so year one, all they had was first years. So they walked to those first years saying, if we're going to study volcanoes, if we're going to study megalithic tombs, where's all the information we can pull from, and put that into a collective learning resource that we can pass on to the students coming behind us, and they can augment and add to. And they're using a particularly exciting piece of software that's been developed by a company with Martin Farrows in Learnovate, where you put in the word volcano, for example, and it produces a magazine article that pulls resources including video, imagery, content into a magazine-like chapter about volcanoes from every conceivable resource that's out there in the internet. And that's very, very powerful. And I think when students sit down with their teachers to say, we have created this particular learning resource, they're exceptionally proud of it, and the experience of learning they have is a far deeper one than just simply opening a book.
Because they have that ownership
Correct,
with it.
exactly.
And I also, and you said, teachers are using the archives and they're using the DOCA and things like that. And I have science teachers coming to me all the time going, do you have that episode of the Science Squad? Because it's a way of us introducing this concept, and because it's there online, because it is there, teachers are already incorporating it in a new way.
I think that whole business of the other media, as yours, coming into the game and being part of, when you put that together with the other sometimes open education resources, sometimes not, but what you're able to produce is a quite different experience in learning for students.
And mixing and
which is brilliant.
remixing.
Correct.
What may be traditional resources and with things that you've created, I think, is where we see people want to go.
I kind of want to throw the student agency in here because that's what gets me most excited. Is the student agency part is I remember a question which was asked by Larry Rosenstock, who's the leads High Tech High, the much famed learning academy, or charter school in the United States. And he's a real visionary on these things, but he challenged his Year 9 students to create a documentary on a city that was a city in 1492, well-chosen date, and a city that is still a city today.
Wow.
And I think everything is in the question you ask, because that gives the student agency. A documentary means it needs to have an angle. That question makes me think history, economy, geography, politics. There are so many things that you can feed into it. It's a really interesting thing. So you produce a 10, 15-minute video on that. And then they have a taco salad evening when they display that, and the parents come in and look at it all. But that way of handling information in a kind of different way, rather than the text that's there that you could do, they're actually putting the text together in a different way in video as well to create something new.
Can I just also say, just in terms of the RTE archives, we launched a beta of a new archive site today. I'll put the link on Twitter. It is a beta, but it makes a lot, our objective is to try and open up. So we've got lots of great content, but it tends to go out on Player or goes out online. It's only there for 21 days. So we're trying to find ways to liberate what we have. It's paid for by the license fee payer, so we really want to make it as available as possible. But I'll put that link out, and as I said, it's a beta. We're looking for feedback, but it's working towards really, as I said, increasing the availability of the content.
I think well, I'll have to draw, unfortunately, the panel discussion to a close because we do have more content for this evening. But I think that that's actually been a really positive discussion. I think there were lots of ideas to build on, but we've also noticed that there are a lot of really good things happening in Ireland at the minute. It's actually just to hook them, keep enthusing our teachers who are being innovative and being revolutionaries, and draw in our students and their agency to maintain that. So thank you so much to Keith Kruger, to Gavin Dykes, to Myrna Laffin, and to Kieran Cannon.